Good evening from RCSI in Dublin, where we're delighted to welcome you back to that familiar campus and to see all of our students coming back to the front door of St. Stephen's Green. Like you, I'm very sorry that yet again we cannot meet at the RCSI reception for fellows, members, alumni and friends held annually at the American College of Surgeons Clinical Congress. In its stead, however, I'm very pleased to welcome you to our Coffee and Connect webinar, which I hope you'll enjoy. I'm joined this evening by Catherine Jordan and Janelle Sherlock, who are our members and fellows team here in Dublin, but always available to provide information and advice and to ensure that your affiliation with RCSI is of value to you. Although we cannot meet in person, I'm delighted to host this event, and I'm very much looking forward to the coming year when we will gather to talk about times gone by, future gatherings, and catch up on events in Ireland and the college, renewing friendships and creating new memories. I'm very grateful to the Vice President-elect of the American College of Surgeons, Dr. Julie Freischlag, who has kindly agreed to say a few words of welcome.
Good morning or afternoon. I hear you're having coffee with the Royal College of Surgeons in Ireland, and it's my pleasure as President-elect of the American College of Surgeons to welcome all of you to our virtual meeting. We're hoping very much so that we have a real meeting next year where I can meet you all. I'm Julie Freischlag. I'm a vascular surgeon. I've been involved with the college for over 30 years, and I cannot tell you how much it means to me. Ronan O'Connell, your president, asked me to say a few words of welcome, and it's my delight to do so. I also saw your lineup for your speakers today: Professor Conor Delaney, Professor Hilary Sanfey, who is a friend of mine, Professor Noel, Dr. Nicolas Mouawad, who I admire so as such a great vascular surgeon in the community, and Professor John Monson. I hope you have a great coffee this morning. I hope you enjoy a lot of the things that are going to happen with the college, even though it's virtual. My talk this year is about enhanced postoperative recovery, as we all have spent lots of time helping our patients get better over time, getting them ready for surgery, doing our surgery as well as we can, and enhancing their post-op recovery. I know we have to do the same thing now as we go forward with enhancing ourselves after COVID. And the pandemic has just brought out the good and also some of the bad. We too are struggling with doing elective surgery, keeping staffing numbers up, and going forward. So hopefully we'll come up with enhanced recovery. I'm going to ask lots of our leaders and young people to do a minute podcast or video or go on social media under a hashtag called Surgeons Sowing Hope, SOWING, but of course, as you know, we do the SEWING too. I hope you'll consider to participate in this campaign so we all can help us each other onto the other side. Thanks so much and have a great coffee.
Thank you so much, Dr. Freischlag. It's been a busy year in the college, so busy in fact it's difficult to believe that a year has passed since the last ACS meeting. Delivery of surgical services has been challenging in Ireland as it has been around the world, and yet our fellows and members, trainers and trainees, together with the entire healthcare workforce, have worked beyond reasonable expectation in the interests of patient care. The vaccination programme has been extraordinarily effective, with almost 90% of the adult population in Ireland now fully vaccinated. Hospital and ITU admissions have plateaued at a level that we may have to accept as the disease becomes endemic. The challenge now is recovery of scheduled care, as there's been a 30% reduction in case numbers over the past 18 months and an overall increase of 15% in surgical waiting lists. There have been many positives, not the least of which is the continuation of medical and health sciences education within RCSI University and postgraduate training in surgery and the faculties of dentistry, radiologists, nursing and midwifery, and sports and exercise medicine. We have continued planning Project Connect, and in the new year, we plan to commence building an extension to the campus of over 13,000 square metres that will link 26 York Street and St. Stephen's Green, providing a rich diversity of spatial types to support the requirements of the college and students, both undergraduate and postgraduate, including surgical trainees. The building will transform the campus, and I hope you will have the opportunity to visit when complete in 2024. Tonight, during our RCSI Coffee and Connect webinar, we will hear from several RCSI fellows based in North America who speak around a theme of resilience and career progression. These interviews will give perspectives from within a variety of surgical specialties. I'm sure you will find them both heartwarming and insightful. We hear from Professor Conor Delaney, CEO and President, Cleveland Clinic, Florida region, and President-elect of the American Society of Colorectal Surgeons. He is in conversation with RCSI Vice President, Laura Vianney. Conor, who trained in Ireland, speaks about the need for technical excellence and exemplary patient care. He highlights how success is about teamwork and how your team functions together. Conor is an honorary fellow of the college.
So it's a great privilege to talk with Professor Conor Delaney here today at the college. So you're an immensely talented young man to me, Conor. You were obviously a very renowned surgeon. To what do you attribute this achievement? And is there one person or a few people who influenced you in your career?
Well, Laura, first, thank you for the opportunity to chat with you today. I feel very privileged to do so thank you. It's nice to connect again. So I think I've been very lucky. I mean, I've met and been exposed to and had time around many amazing people during my career. Earlier on, there were probably two who really gave me vision as to things that one can do. And those were Tom Starzl. So I spent 2 years working with Tom Starzl. Dr. Starzl was the pioneer of liver transplantation. He was at Pittsburgh, shortlisted for the Nobel Prize, amazing visionary. And I spent 2 years there doing lab work for a master's and a PhD, and so got to know him a little bit. And then second, Vic Fazio here in Cleveland, or at least in Cleveland. I'm in Florida now. And at the time, Vic was the preeminent IBD and colorectal cancer surgeon in the world. And they taught me, Dr. Starzl, it was aspiration and see what you can do. And for Dr. Fazio, it was the concept of technical excellence and looking after every patient. And they became two seeds around which I tried to frame everything that I've done since.
What were the key steps to you building your career that you took to build your own career?
Sure. Well, you know, I think I took their advice very much to heart. So first, I concentrated and doubled down on a high volume clinical practice and clinical and technical expertise and experience in building that. And I was lucky to be at Cleveland Clinic at the time, so I got to embrace the culture that they had of helping others and putting patients first. But then in parallel, quickly trying to build a research and teaching program and partner with others on the team. And then just availing of opportunities as they came along, whether it was for publishing or for developing and leading new fields or educating others. And that gave me the opportunity to interact with many people over the coming years.
You've achieved many honors. Is there anything that you feel most proud of and why?
I'm probably most proud of my family, my wife and my kids. But professionally, there's probably two things actually. One was after 6 years at Cleveland Clinic, I had to make a very complicated decision whether to stay there and look at leadership opportunities or to go somewhere and do something on my own. And I got recruited to Case Western in Cleveland, a program that at the time had only one colorectal surgeon. And with others who recruited and built, we ended up having one of the most prominent teams in the country. And so that was very special, and largely probably led to me getting asked to go back to the clinic then 6 or 7 years ago as chair of digestive disease and surgery. And that was arguably the best group of GI and surgery and transplant and trauma consultants anywhere. So that was an incredible privilege.
Yes. And you've taken many very onerous administration posts as well. What prompted you to do this? And on the other side, what would also you consider to be your most important contribution to medicine?
Well, I never
really
really
two questions in one.
Yeah, okay. Well, first thinking administration, I never really thought about getting involved in administration. It was never a primary intention. It was really taking opportunities as they came along to keep improving outcomes and process around care. And so I got involved in two areas particularly. One was enhanced recovery pathways, which are perioperative care pathways that we started working on over 20 years ago now, and was lucky enough to lead that in the US. And the other was developing laparoscopic colorectal surgery, because I was very early in that field. And so that got me involved in quality and operations and value and finance. And then as you start to recruit others, you realize it's about building teams. And I just found it fascinating. And I realized that that's really how you can scale your ability to look after others and have an impact on people and teams and patients.
Yes.
And so that's kind of what got me into it.
And as you said, you have a wonderful family and they've been a great source of support throughout your career. How have you managed to fit in your whole life, your home life with such a high achieving academic career? Has that been difficult?
No, I've had great support. I mean, I think it comes down to particularly time management. Having a laptop that you can sit on the couch and do work helps too. And then really, trying to spend time. So when the kids are younger, you work late at night. When they're teenagers, you work early mornings at the weekends. Make time to coach teams and spend time with your spouse. And I've been lucky enough to manage to figure out the time management.
Yes. And then when you think of trainees wishing to emulate your success, have you any advice to give them with gaining, such credentials that you have? Not that they could, many of them, but, would you have any advice or what do you think?
I'm sure many can. I think when you go into practice, it's a difficult time. You come through training, you're very busy, you're the center of the training circle. And I think when you transition into being an attending or a consultant in practice, the first thing is to be humble. That's really, really important. And every now and again, we see people coming out who fail because they think it's about them. And it's not. It's about your team. It's about how your team functions together. And then the next thing is to focus immediately on clinical and technical outcomes and your patient's experience and outcomes and help others. And if you build teams and do things like that and then start to write about it and teach about it and research it, the rest follows.
I mean, I agree. I think a team is very, very important, and I've always worked with teams. I always think also the whole concept of being a privilege to look after patients is maybe something that you need to instill in a team. Wouldn't you agree?
Absolutely. I mean, putting patients first and sorting them out individually is what this is all about.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
And just to ask you, Conor, would you have any advice now for an Irish healthcare manager at the moment?
I think to be aspirational in the opportunity around efficiencies that you can realize, there are huge opportunities for us to realize in healthcare, whether it's around length of stay, whether it's around cost. Our biggest challenge probably is staffing and recruitment. There are international healthcare staffing shortages, and that's the tough thing. But even still, there are significant opportunities. And I think we all have to roll up our sleeves and help. And unless practicing leading physicians, surgeons actually do it, roll up their sleeves and help, it's going to be very challenging for healthcare in coming years. It's a limited resource. The finances are always limited, but there's more opportunities to save cost and be more efficient. And by doing that, end up providing better care. It's about value. And as you improve efficiency, you improve quality. And we have a long way that we can keep improving.
Well, look, it's been really good to talk with you today, and thank you so much. It's been a great privilege and honour for me to talk with you, and I look forward to seeing you in Dublin in not the too distant future. And I wish you and your family good luck, and I hope they remain and stay well over the coming months. So thank you so much for talking with us today, Conor.
Laura, thank you. The privilege is all mine, and I appreciate the opportunity.
RCSI Council Member Professor Deborah McNamara speaks with Professor Hilary Sanfey Emeritus Professor of Surgery at Southern Illinois University in Springfield, Illinois. Hilary has a very close association with RCSI. Indeed, we were appointed to the old Senior Registrar scheme together in 1986. She's a champion of the role of women in surgery. She gives perspective on self-care as part of professionalism. She speaks about the importance of friends, family, and building resilience outside of surgery. She also is an honorary fellow of the college.
So Professor Sanfey, you're very welcome to this RCSI webinar. It's lovely to see you again, and thank you so much for taking part.
Thank you, Professor McNamara, and it is a real pleasure to see you. And as always, I'm sorry we're doing this yet again on Zoom and not in person.
Hopefully soon we'll be meeting again. I guess for all of us, it's been a very challenging sort of 18 months. What have you observed about what's worked for people in sustaining themselves during that period, and maybe what hasn't worked?
Yeah, so I think the people who fared best were people who were single, people who were perhaps people who were used to their own company, people who were introverts. You know, I talked to my brother who's an introvert, and even though he's married and has a family, he loved the fact that people weren't calling in all the time. But no, I think it's been hardest on families where maybe there were two spouses trying to work from home in a small environment, trying to homeschool kids all at once. I think that was extremely hard. But in terms of what worked, I think you think about it as a personal level and a systems level. At a personal level, I had a lot of Zoom happy hours with my friends, you know, so we could connect and stay in touch. The Zoom meetings did get tiring after a while. It's more, you know, somehow when you have a meeting in person for an hour, it's less tiring than just looking at a computer for the same period of time. And then at a systems level, I think we're just beginning to see the problems actually that are going to come out of this, because what we're seeing, at least in the US, is a reluctance of the workforce to go back to in-person working. And we're starting to see shortages that will maybe only become more apparent in the future. One of the positives may be that we will look more at allowing people to work from home and making the workplace a lot more flexible in that regard.
And in terms of that stress of working during such a difficult period, I suppose the experience globally is that a lot of doctors and nurses were facing kind of breaking point in terms of burnout. In terms of the techniques that you're teaching people and training people to use about building their resistance against burnout, what have you discovered that works for people and for you?
Well, surgeons are notably bad at recognizing stress in themselves. And typically our coping strategies for any kind of stress are to keep the stress to ourselves, keep going on as if nothing has happened, and maybe work even harder. So the first step is recognizing that you're at breaking point and realizing you're making mistakes that you would not have normally made. And sometimes the first signs are in relationships where we manage to keep it together at work, but then we go home and take it out on the kids or the spouse or whatever. So the first thing is just having that self-awareness that you realize something has changed. Now you're making more mistakes at work, your work is sloppy, you're being late for meeting, perhaps not paying as much attention to your personal appearance as you might have done in the past. But also I think we need to watch for signs in our colleagues. So we need to look for these changes. Somebody being a little more short-tempered, making mistakes, not being up to date in their notes, coming in late for meetings, looking unkempt, etc. And if we see this stress or change in our colleagues, we need to approach them and say, hey, you know, you want to talk about it, everything okay? We need to have, we need to have two things. One, there's a personal input, and then there's the systems input. And we've not done well in helping at the institutional level, because institutions have done things like put in yoga at lunchtime. I mean, who can take time out at lunchtime to do yoga? You know, and so they say it's really important that you take this time off, but can you just see these patients, you know, before you go, or can you take on this extra clinic session? So if we're going to put in these institutional measures, then we need to do it in a way that people can avail of them.
I'm really interested in you making the comment about the observing stress and burnout in our colleagues. And those are really tough conversations to have with colleagues. What approach have you taken when maybe your colleague mightn't hear the difficulties that you're observing?
Yeah, and it depends on on the relationship you have with the colleague to start off with. So, you know, I think it can't be judgmental in any way. You can just say, look, I've noticed you've been late a couple of times this week. Is everything okay? Anything you want to talk about? I'm here. If you want to come talk to me. So just opening the door sometimes is enough. You don't want to jump right in and say, you know, look, you've made all these mistakes this week. What's happening? Just, you know, I've just noticed this change. It's not like you. Has something changed in that you want to talk about? But people have to be open as well to recognizing that this comes down to professionalism. So self-care to me is part of professionalism. If you're not taking care of yourself, you're not able to give the best of yourself to your patients. And so we too, as a system, need to get away from this idea of the self-sacrificing doctor who works 24 hours a day as our exemplar of what is perfect in the medical profession, and recognize that we're also human and have human needs and can make mistakes, and make it okay for people to own up and ask for help in an environment that protects their confidentiality, that doesn't ridicule people, accuse them of being weak. And this is one of the fears, I think, coming forwards, particularly in the US, that if you are somehow perceived to have to be depressed or have any kind of mental illness, that it gets reported to the licensing body and it can hurt you in the future. So we need to have just a better way to take care of each other.
So I suppose for those of us who are working our way through our career, and in terms of career progression, you know, obviously resilience is something that we build. And, you know, looking back over your career, which has, you know, held a number of really important positions and a lot of highlights, I'm sure there were times that weren't as easy. How important is resilience in developing the career, throughout the career and in career progression?
I think it's key, absolutely. And, you know, I've had different challenges. I've had personal challenges and professional challenges. And a lot of the time, depending on the circumstances, I've relied on friends, family, faith, sometimes to just allow you to bounce back. And, you know, any of the challenges that I've had, they've allowed me to, they've been hard and they've been stressful to deal with, but they've allowed me to take stock. And probably in the long term, I've had opportunities that would not have been available to me if I'd not had certain challenges. In, you know, if I'd got the job I wanted in Ireland, I wouldn't have left the country. Not to say that I'm sorry, that I'm happy to have left Ireland, and I hope I'm going to get to come back now that I'm retired. But, you know, I've had opportunities in the United States that I might not have had I stayed in Ireland, opportunities on the international stage. So I think it comes down to friends, family, and having something that sustains you outside of medicine, and being able to bounce back and realize, okay, if one door closes, another opens. How do I retool myself to make myself more competitive if it's a job thing that has not worked out? And for me, when I didn't get a job in Ireland, I had to think, okay, so do I want to do what I enjoy doing, which is transplant and hepatobiliary, which meant leaving the country, or do I want to stay in Ireland and work in a different area? And I chose to do to make the different choice that I wanted to stay with transplant and hepatobiliary. Yeah, I think there's a lot of discussion about resilience, and to me, it's about bouncing back. Persistence is another word that I like, because I think if, you know, when you get a knock, you have to just think, okay, how do I pull myself back up? The word I don't like is grit, which we've been hearing a lot about in surgical education lately. They have to instill grit into our surgical residents. And as to quote Barbara Bass, grit can be a disabling value because it can take away the need to show it can criticize people who show weakness. and it can make you feel slow to ask for help because there's grit, you know, you got to be strong all the time. And we've tried so hard to get away from that macho type of image for surgeons that now we're going back to grit. So that's a word I don't like.
Professor Sanfey, thank you so much for sharing your experience and wisdom with us. We could certainly talk about that for a very long time. We're all very sad to be missing the American College this year. I think it would be a very special one for us here in RCSI, as you know.
Absolutely. And I'm particularly sorry because, as you may know, Professor Oscar Traynor will be receiving an honorary fellowship from the American College of Surgeons this year, I believe on the 24th. It will all be done virtually, but hopefully, you know, the American College does in future years recognize anyone who's ever been an honorary fellow. So hopefully next year will be in person and he can be recognized in a different way, and hopefully I'll be able to nominate a few more people from Ireland as well for honorary fellowship.
Well, thank you once again, Professor Sanfey.
Now, Professor Noel Williams, Rhoads-Harrington Professor in Surgery and Director of Metabolic and Bariatric Surgery, Penn State Medicine, talks with Council member Professor Camilla Carroll about the grounding he got as a medical student in RCSI and during his surgical training in Ireland. Indeed, I seem to remember Noel as an intern when I was an SHO at the old Richmond Hospital. Noel speaks about how he fosters resilience in Penn Med amongst his surgical residents.
Really nice to be on, Camilla. As ever, always happy to talk to folks from home. And thank you for thinking of me to help out with this. And I'm more than happy to, to contribute or answer any questions that you may have.
So may I just start off by setting the scene? And Noel, we both studied medicine at RCSI in the early 80s, and we began our surgical postgraduate training in Ireland. How did these early years prepare you for the rigors of a surgical career and the pursuit of surgical excellence?
So that's like an easy question to answer. As we both know, the curriculum that we had in undergraduate medical school at that time was very thorough. We mostly went straight from high school. We didn't do an undergraduate first, so there was no graduate program. But we went through in detail anatomy, biochemistry, physiology before going on to the clinical subjects, including the clinical pathology, etc. So the grounding we got both in the preclinical years and then the clinical years, I think, is unsurpassed. The amount of patients we saw, different specialties. Obviously, we both have fond memories from, doing our obstetric rotations, our ophthalmology rotations, anesthesia. So we got a really broad education. And I think one of the other things that was important was to do a medicine surgery internship before we chose our specialty. And then the postgraduate training, again, was very detailed. We saw a lot of patients. We did a lot of surgery. I think, fortunately, back then, we were able to have a mix of great teachers, mentors, but we were also given a certain degree of autonomy to develop alone, to be able to make decisions alone, to be able to get into a little bit of trouble alone and see how you get out of that. So I think that set a stage from an undergraduate and postgraduate training to really set us in the right direction.
Thank you very much. And now you are heavily involved in a program director role at Penn Medicine. Surgical training is long, it's intense, and frequently stressful. At Penn, how do you foster resilience amongst your surgical residents?
So I think that's a very important term. It's a very important part of training. So, the training is different. The paradigms are different now. In the US and presumably in the European setting also, there are hours regulations about how much time you can stay in the hospital as a trainee. So we take that into account very early, in that we have an 80-hour work rule. We actually have days off individually for residents to recover. We call them recovery days. And the training that we get, beginning as interns all the way through their residency, we spend a lot of time now looking at different aspects of wellness, different aspects of, as you point out, resilience, how you make time for other things, but you also can't forget about the excellence that's required to get to the same level of training that we had. And I think with, spending more time and emphasis on the individual years doing that allows us to achieve that at the end. So a general surgery resident who comes to a place like Penn stays here for 3 years preclinical, which kind of equated to what we had coming up to a registrar year and completing your first registrar year. Then they go into the lab for 2 years, which we call professional development. And it's not just the lab work they're doing, it's their overall professional development. And in fact, they mature quite a lot there. So when they come back out for the 2 years of fourth year, fifth year to complete their clinical training, they're ready. And it's kind of a very sponge-like last 2 years. They do a lot and learn a lot in that period of time. But there's a lot of emphasis along the way on making sure that folks are well, making sure that we have enough supervision for them. Here at Penn, we have a total of 70 general surgery residents and 1 program director and 3 associate program directors. And in addition to that, each year has a mentor for the 7 or 8 residents in that year. So, the strong always survive, but, we're taking different folks into the residencies now. We have to make sure everybody comes to the same level. Some people peak early, some people don't peak to the end. And you have to make sure that the educational process really gets them to where they need to be at the end.
Can I ask you, increasingly we report that also attendings suffer significantly from emotional exhaustion and professional dissatisfaction. How do you address this at your own hospital, Noel? And what experience have you of colleagues dealing with these type of situations?
Sure, it's a great point. So, we have our Department of Surgery is quite large, and we have different divisions. So we have cardiac, thoracic, transplant, vascular, all the different general surgery and surgery specialties. Each has its own division chief, and within that process, they obviously have a large number of attendings or consultants in that situation. And obviously, they would meet with them on a regular basis, as would the chairman of surgery. On average, the chairman of surgery would meet all faculty probably once every 2 years. But in addition to that, you have, division chiefs within each specialty, which go through things like all the way from compensation down to, or not down to, but across and up to professional development. It can be stressful in a place like this to get promoted. In other words, you come in as an assistant professor, after 8 years, you become an associate professor. If you don't become an associate professor, you have to leave. So it's kind of an up or out situation. Once you're an associate, you're pretty much home free. And then, of course, within 5 years of that, you can get promoted to a full professor. So these are the marks along, the milestones along our training that we need to achieve. And that alone can be stressful, forgetting about the actual surgery that we do. And, the individuals within the division really look after situations like that. And the other thing is that each attending, when they arrive, there is an identified mentor. So, for example, I have a junior partner within my division or within my section of bariatric and metabolic surgery, who I've been his mentor since he started on staff. So I make sure that everything is okay for him, because, at times the stress of that can lead to some behavioral issues, not specifically him, but across the board with other individuals, to the point you made about stress having an effect on our performance. So I think it's something, and the other thing is the department has a professionalism committee. Mm-hmm. And, we have the professional committee has the back of the individuals. Having said that, there are certain behavior standards that are unacceptable. And, in an era of when you can report anybody anytime, we have to be aware of that. And you can't discount things. Nobody gets an issue where something bad happens based on one event. Obviously, if there's a series of events, it's a different ballgame. But also, more importantly, it identifies that the individual is in trouble. He or she is in trouble. meaning that the stress is getting to them, and either there needs to be a timeout, there needs to be some kind of therapy. A lot of departments in the country now have vice chairs of wellness, which looks at things like fatigue, wellness. I've heard some of my colleagues say, I haven't taken a 2-week vacation in about 4 years. I mean, clearly that is a major problem, not just individually, but from your family. And it's something that, I guess I've always espoused to that, even in my training. I tell the trainees now, don't wait till your first or second years in attending to kind of enjoy a portion of life. You need to have the quality of life to come back fresh. So these are things that, our experience in the way we were trained, I tried to pass on to them and make sure that this is not just a wellness situation, but a fun time training. And then from an attending standpoint, the same. The hardest years of your life in academic surgery or medicine in this country is the first 5 years.
Yeah.
So you have to establish yourself, surgical practice, the administrative roles that you take on, the research that you do, whether it's clinical research or basic science research, and even in a private practice setting. When you go out into private practice, it's scary in the beginning, we try to encourage people to go to practices where there are good mentors. In other words, day one, you don't get the toughest case. You get the toughest case with your partner helping you. So I think those things are very important and can be, traumatic for younger individuals when they start out.
Yeah. I think that's all very important, and you bring us on the life journey of the surgeon in everything you've said, from being ready day one to practice to 5 years into the job, still finding your feet sometimes. Noel, it has been an absolute pleasure talking to you today. I really look forward to seeing you back here in Dublin at RCSI in the near future. You are one of our shining lights for this medical school, for surgery in general, and certainly you have talked very elegantly about how resilience is important in pursuing excellence.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. And just if I could, just one last thing that I would say is, you mentioned the college and the brotherhood that we and sisterhood we have with the college. And what I try to do for my part now is that in running the preliminary surgical program, right now I actually have 4 college of surgeons graduates who are here as interns, and I try to get as an international medical graduate myself. I try to get them here and position them around the country, and that gives me great fulfillment and in continuing the legacy of the college.
And we at RCSI are very grateful for those opportunities that you give to our medical students, both Irish and North Americans. Without you and your colleagues, it would be very difficult for our students to gain their expertise. We are most grateful.
Great. Delightful to talk to you, and hopefully see you soon.
Hope to see you soon.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Dr. Nicolas Mouawad, who is an RCSI alumnus, speaks with Council Member Professor Paul Burke on the importance of being able to recover quickly from disappointing outcomes and the value of peer-to-peer support in building resilience.
Okay, so Nick, in terms of obviously the characteristics that you would have as a vascular surgeon, and I think many surgeons, I would have seen this here in our own hospital, they have coped, I would feel, very well during the pandemic, because they would often have challenging times. But for others, it hasn't been so good. And I just wondered, what has your own experience been, particularly in the hospital environment during the pandemic? What kind of challenges have you noticed? And, how do you think how have you been able to help other people, particularly among your colleagues and junior trainee staff?
Yeah, thank you, Professor. The pandemic for us, work didn't really stop for us throughout the pandemic. As a matter of fact, as vascular surgeons, we were challenged even further due to the high acuity of the patients that we see, and being redeployed to other areas such as critical care, or being able to provide other services in the hospital. It was very, very challenging because we already had a very busy clinical workload, and sometimes having to defer complex operations, even aneurysms and so forth, was very stressful for us. because generally speaking, outside of the pandemic, we would have never delayed or postponed some of these operations. So we had a very open dialogue with our colleagues, particularly in the same specialty, but in different specialties as well. Throughout the pandemic, we became more in touch with colleagues around our region, ultimately around the country, and ultimately even internationally, because we were trying to learn from each other and be able to open ourselves and even vent about complications or issues that we were seeing that we were basically had no control over. As surgeons, physicians, of course, but as surgeons in general, we're used to being in control or being in a very controlled environment because we don't want to leave anything to variation. But in this unknown scenario, we found it to be extremely challenging. And having, like I said, formal and informal peer-to-peer support, open dialogue and conversations, and understanding that we can learn from each other more so than ever. I spoke about us feeling somewhat isolated, and I discussed this previously, but we talked about being, socially distant, yet we have never been closer than we have been now with the technology available for us to interact over video chat or Zoom. Even though physically we were not with one another, we really allowed us to have good communication, which I thought was important, which I thought was very, very important for us.
Yes, so the inability to have physical contact with people, though, has been challenging, though, hasn't it? I mean, and often people, that hand on the shoulder, so to speak.
Absolutely. The lack of physical contact was very challenging. I think, again, as a physician, it's even more challenging because we started being involved in these telephone and televisits, but it's, it takes away from what we were all taught, particularly at RCSI, where we have to have a physical evaluation of the patient. So it's challenging for us, and it's been difficult, but we've been trying to adapt.
And so finally, Nick, in terms of advice to young trainees coming into surgery now, just about to start a residency, what advice would you give them in terms of, in helping to build their resilience? And indeed, is resilience the right word, or is it endurance? Or what would you describe as the best quality to have to be able to function well as a fine surgeon, but also as a good human being, so to speak?
Yeah, that's a great question, Professor. Again, we said resilience is, really the capacity to recover quickly from difficulties or from a tough situation, or your ability to, as we say, bounce back. So there's an element of grit and toughness. And what I would like to tell the younger trainees and even colleagues is that it's okay to feel worried. It's okay to feel the way you feel. It is tough for us all. At the end of it all, we're all human beings, and we're focused our whole life to be able to take care of other people, usually at the detriment of ourselves. We're always worried about everybody else, and we forget to take a step back and think about ourselves. So it's okay to spend some time with yourselves. This is difficult for all of us, and it doesn't make you less of a physician or less of a surgeon. If you just need a few minutes to say, hey, look, this really affected me. I'm having a hard time with this. We all have, physical, emotional, and psychological concerns that it's okay to spend some time with yourself from time to time. Lean on your friends, lean on your colleagues, because they have been through the same situation or are going through the same situation as you. And always you can look back at your mentors or those that have taught you, because their wisdom and experience goes a very, very long way.
Excellent. Well, Professor Nicolas Mouawad, thank you very much for that very insightful view of things.
Thank you, Professor.
It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Finally, I spoke with Professor John Monson, AdventHealth Medical Group Colorectal Surgery Executive Medical Director and Digestive Health and Surgery Institute, Central Florida Division. John and I were medical students and surgical trainees together. John speaks about the challenges he faced during the pandemic and the impact on his ability to do elective surgery. He speaks of his sense of being institutionalized and how people have begun to lose certain interactive skills living on Zoom and Teams. John is also an honorary fellow of the college. How are you planning to deal with the backlog?
Yeah, very good question. I mean, the US system is different, as you know. It's driven by income generation in hospitals. So the hospitals are, they may be not for profit, but as was pointed out by somebody recently, not-for-profit is not a business model, it's a tax code. So the hospitals are motivated to work in order to sustain their business. And so there is nobody not anxious to get back and do the work. So the business did not go away, as indeed in any health system. It's not as though they can, the individuals in need of care can receive their care next door. So it just got delayed. So the work is still there. And our experience from last year is that it took about 4 months to regain where we were. I mean, our waiting list issues, as you know, are very different to the other side of the Atlantic anyway.
Did you extend the working week or extend the working day or both, or just reverted to what you were doing anyway?
Yeah, we just reverted to what we would have done normally. And as you know, the day does tend to start earlier, and certainly in the ORs, they do tend to finish later. But our biggest challenges this time around have been staff shortages, because we've huge numbers of people have left the healthcare arena and taken jobs elsewhere. And that is currently the single biggest challenge we are facing today.
Is that because of burnout or because they just wanted to stay clear of COVID?
I think you could list many reasons for it, and it includes all of those things. It's the COVID and the restrictions and various aspects of it, for healthcare workers has been truly relentless here in the United States. And so there's a lot of that. The market has spoken. Traveling nurses, for example, can now make $10,000 a week. And so employed nurses are taking traveling jobs and to make better money. If their view is if they're at risk, they might as well earn some more money. They've left healthcare altogether because it's been too destructive on their mental health and their work-life balance, etc.
And for yourself and Aideen, what have you done to try and keep yourselves in the right frame to avoid depression or get the whole thing getting in on you? I mean, travel has been restricted and all of that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very good question, and it's predicated on the fact that we have avoided all of those things, and I'm pretty sure that's not the case. We haven't traveled anywhere in 2 years. I think the last time I was on a plane was in January of last year. I know people have traveled, but we took a decision not to. It's been very difficult. You're very restricted in what you can do. And so it has been difficult to maintain. You find your life changing, and what would have been a norm before, you wouldn't consider doing. And, I certainly have found that a sense of perhaps being institutionalized might be a word, where you've begun to lose certain interactive skills because you live your life on Microsoft Teams or Zoom, and you don't. Zoom has created a whole industry of people who make sure that there is no time in your day that doesn't have a Zoom or a Teams meeting in it, because somebody spots a gap and says, oh, look, let's put another meeting in there quickly. So you can literally go, morning to evening without a break, as I'm sure you do that.
Well, I'm glad we've managed to find a slot in your diary for this quick Zoom interview. John, I hope it won't be too long till you get back to visit us in Ireland. And I certainly hope it's not too long before I get to Orlando, because I could do with a little or and some sunshine in the Orange State.
Well, they've now opened up restrictions to traveling into the United States, and so you're able to travel now. So we look forward to seeing you here. And now, of course, is the time when you should be in Florida, because for the next 6 months the weather is bearable.
John, good to see you, and thank you very much for joining us for this.
Pleasure. Stay well and stay safe.
Thanks.
Bye now.
And to finish this evening, we're joined by Professor Kieran O'Boyle, who will offer us a reflection on the interviews that we've heard.
The Irish poet Seamus Heaney once said that anyone with gumption and a sharp mind will take the measure of two things: what is said and what is done. It's been really heartening to listen to the video interviews and to hear about what's happening in relation to resilience in surgery, and in particular to hear about what's being done. I want to thank the RCSI Council and the President for inviting me to do a brief reflection on the interviews. Professor Sanfey speaks about the importance of developing both personal and systems approaches to well-being at work, and I couldn't agree with her more. I've been involved in looking at stress in the workplace for over 40 years, and the one thing I have learned is that teaching people personal strategies for coping with work stress is less than half the answer. We also need to change work systems of training and delivery. A great deal of new research is showing us that it is possible to create positive organizations in which people can flourish. That's very much a matter of culture, but particularly a matter of leadership. It was also wonderful to hear the speakers talk about the importance of supportive families, colleagues, and mentors. Research in positive psychology is showing us that we as humans are hardwired for social connection, and that the quality of our relationships is important not only for our well-being, our mental well-being, but also even for our longevity. We know that in helping others, empathy is important, but compassion is even more important. Compassion brings empathy along by taking action. And in essence, that's the essential component of care. Compassionate relationships and compassionate conversations are incredibly important in the world of resilience. To quote Seamus Heaney again, he says, "If you have the words, there's always a chance that you will find the way." Some years ago here in RCSI, we adopted the concept of positive education, and we have established a Centre for Positive Psychology and Health. Positive education is really important, and it's basically an idea of an education that blends academic learning with the development of character and well-being. So it prepares students and trainees with life skills such as resilience, optimism, growth mindsets, reflective practice, engagement, mindfulness, and so on. And it's based on the science of happiness. Lindsay Oates, one of the leading researchers in positive education, defines it thus. He says, "Positive education is the development of educational environments that enable the learner to engage with established curricula in addition to knowledge and skills to develop their own and others' well-being." All of the speakers have also spoken about the COVID pandemic. Albert Einstein once said, "Adversity introduces a man to himself." And there's no doubt that we have come through a period of adversity with the COVID pandemic. It has challenged many people to reevaluate the meaning of their life, the meaning of their work. And the consequences for well-being have often been hidden. We expect to see a second pandemic of mental illness. Many in the healthcare sector are considering leaving it, and staff shortages are going to be a thing of the near future. The leadership response of healthcare organizations must be to create positive cultures that meet the basic human needs of autonomy, competence, and relatedness. But the adversity of the pandemic has also brought about wonderful developments. Science and medicine have stood up even at times when the political response was less than satisfactory. And it is often in adversity that we learn about our strengths, develop our characters, find meaning, and develop our resilience. An old African proverb says, "Smooth seas do not make skillful sailors." Finally, when I think about resilience, I always think about the psychiatrist Viktor Frankl. Frankl, as many of you will know, was taken to the concentration camps. He lost both his parents, his wife, and his brother in the camps, but he survived the camps for 3 years. And when he was liberated, he wrote this famous book, Man's Search for Meaning. And there's a quote that I'd like to share with you again from that book, which is, for me, the essence of resilience. Frankl said this: "Everything can be taken from a person, but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude to any given set of circumstance, to choose one's own way." That is the essence of resilience, and that is what we need to practice each and every day. As the Buddha says, every morning we are born again. What we do today is what matters most.